The Third Estate, the revolutionary press of Redlands High School, released December 1999. What is a revolutionary press? Well, so there's this kid, myself. I've been telling you, like, growing up, not really poor, definitely not with money. Noticing I'm not one of like the haves, kind of a have not, kind of a not dominant culture kid. However you say this, these are just words, but like there's patterns, and we're fitting into the patterns. Kind of not really trusting this high school thing. Seeing my ASB friends go on and do that track, not liking that. But then seeing my like getter friends just like not even bringing paper and pens to school, not liking that. My friends are smoking weed, not liking that. Going to parties and drinking. So I'm just kind of doing my own thing, especially when I had my own car. I had a 280Z Datsun, beautiful car. Something I mean, my parents are very good to me, and so, well, because they were insurance, and so they had the little insurance agency eventually. By the time I was in high school, they got a little insurance agency, a little bit of money, and then like we always had new people with cars, and we had connections. So, the other disaffected of our high school, but the ones who did smoke weed, some of them, and then the other ones, the anarchist, and we had a group, and that's how society works. That's one of the things that like I'm kind of concerned about now is that we're so identitarian, so much putting people in boxes, and society is actually a mixture. It's a collaboration and the cross pollination which gets things done. When you have monoculture, that's usually the sign of culture death, and you can look at that in like any ecology. Just look at the physical world, the intellectual world, and so you want diversity, and but not forced diversity. So this newspaper wasn't created by a bunch of purely anarchists or a bunch of purely disaffected or like whatever you would call me, like intellectually disaffected or like the pot smokers or whatever. This was like, I mean, and that's maybe like why people like me are the only ones who could have like pulled this off. I was like the producer of this thing. So we had people who would talk about how bullshit high school was, and we had this kid who wanted to run for ASB president, not Randall, but this other kid. I think he was a pot smoker, but he was definitely like, just like very anti-authoritarian, with a girlfriend skipping class, smoking pot and stuff. Aaron Carmian, I think his name was. And then I would run into him in the hallway, and real recognized real. He was a real dude. And then I didn't hang out with much people. I knew these people, and I was in the advanced classes too, so I knew the smart ones. So we had people in the advanced classes who were like the anarchists of the advanced classes. That's why it's called the Third Estate. Jonathan Frederickson was probably one of the more intellectual people. And so he was like all about like the French. When we learned about AP Euro and stuff, we're like, oh shit, French Revolution, that's crazy. Because really, the more I look into politics, French Revolution is where we get all of our modern terms and modern ideology of modern politics, left and right, and all this bullshit that we use to describe modern situations, which probably have very little relevance. No, that's not true. These patterns are still replicating, but we need new terms and we need new ideas to explain the current situations we find ourselves in. That's something that I've felt for a long time now. So this whole left-right bullshit, we need to walk away from that stuff. But anyway, so this is an example. That's a high school idea to keep describing a left-right dynamic. So we use, when you're in high school, you decide to borrow these terms from history. So the Third Estate, we did that. Something about like, you had like different estates in the French Revolution. I was trying to get back into it this year. So I think that's the people, is it? I don't know. I'll look it up. The good thing about the internet age is I feel like you could be a little bit loose intellectually because you could just, source it. So that's why we called it that, after something about the French Revolution. And then our high school had a paper called the Hibachi, and that's part of the bullshit. So we were the counterculture. You have the dominant culture, which is the school newspaper, and like what we nowadays call like the basic people who bought into all this bullshit, like, oh, high school's cool, the prep rally people and blah blah blah. And then you have like people like us who's like, I guess what Nirvana was trying to be too. You see it in the music, you see it in the pop culture. You have pop culture, and then you have people who's like, pop culture is artificial culture. Like there's real shit out here. And so like Smells Like Teen Spirit, Nirvana, and they're all like making fun of like pep rallies. Or like we would have the rallies for the high school games. Like we weren't the kids who went to the high school game and cheered on the football players. We were like, but like I wasn't out there like drinking or smoking anything. I was just kind of like watching, kind of observing, trying to make my own thoughts. But this paper was made by a lot of these disaffected kids. So some of the druggies, some of the intellectually disaffected, blah blah blah. they would talk about shit, and I was like, dude, let's, it's like we recognize a train wreck happening. We're all in high school. We're all like, this is bullshit. Aaron wants to run for ASB president. And I think he did run, and he did win. And then the principal didn't let him become president, and that's how bullshit it is. Is that this kid won the popular vote, and then the principal vetoed it, and that was like right there, like, because when you're a kid and you recognize bullshit, you think that by calling it out, the world should right itself. And when it doesn't, that's really the loss of innocence. When you realize that the world doesn't care about injustice, the world cares about power dynamics, or it doesn't care. That's what it is. The world doesn't care. The world is just mechanisms and systems that are playing off of each other, which is good and bad. It's bad because no one's going to take care of you, but it's good because this is a sandbox, and whatever we can figure out to do is what we'll do. But there's no one coming to save you. There's no parent out there who's going to establish order. There's no benevolent, hand that's going to come down and right the wrongs. And so you're like, he won the presidency. You should be the class president. These are your rules. And the principal's like, no, I'm not going to let that kid be the president of your class. I recognized that when I was in 7th grade, when I was trying out these ASB tracks, these class president tracks. So my brother, he was in all that stuff. So 2 years later, you're coming with those expectations, and all the teachers started to learn that, oh, this kid isn't like his brother. My brother was a good grades kid, do what he's told. But I got the doors open for me, which then I would walk through and then be asked to leave. So in 7th grade, I was in leadership, and leadership is like the beginning of that ASB stuff. So back when like you're doing your extracurriculars, that was one of the ones I did, is in 7th grade, when I tried out for drama, and then I faked that fight and got kicked out of that. I'm pretty sure that lady was also the ASB teacher, or the leadership teacher. Maybe she wasn't. She was involved. That drama lady was, she was later on the speech and debate teacher, so she was definitely involved in all these extracurriculars. Martha Kennedy. Never really got along with her. Was that her? Maybe it was another lady. She was involved in drama. But yeah, leadership was that ASB thing. I tried out for it in 7th grade. I remember early morning auditions, and then I got into it, and so now I'm in the cool, obviously ASB is the student government, so I'm in the government track. If I do these things through high school, and then I go into college, and then I join the college whatever, and then I worked like Randall, and he was the governor of California in the YMCA thing, and now he's worked for the California governor's office, and now he's getting his law degree at Berkeley Law School. Randall has a very nice trajectory from when he was young to become a public official, and that's culture capture, I guess, or culture propagation. Is our society has a dominant culture at the top, and all the way at the very bottom, when we're growing up and matriculating through the culture, we can go on these paths and we get selected. When I was in the military, I was selected for military intelligence because I tested well, and I got selected into a pathway up there. So this is a detour from matriculation into the dominant culture. When some of us who are a little bit more intelligent than to just blindly follow these patterns that are laid out before us, because the thing that you recognize in reading history or psychology or whatever is the infinite potential of the human spirit is, no matter how much they try to put us in these little mazes and this cheese on our path to keep us going forward, all these little incentives, there'll always be people who question it, always people who stop. And I guess like I'm one of those dudes, and the rest of them who started this high school with, or this revolutionary press with us, were like, you know what? There's a lot of cheese on these paths, but like there's a lot of like bullshit too. It's just it stinks. And so that metaphor is terrible. And then, so all of us were like talking, Hibachi's bullshit, blah, blah, we should start an underground newspaper. I forgot where the idea came from. And I was like, dude, let's have the meeting, let's do it. So I like started helping organize. I seem to have always, consistently throughout my life, been a catalyst like that. Like, let's just do it, stop talking and do it. And so we did a couple after school meetings, and I was like, my parents have a insurance agency. I have a printer. So I was like, we could do the legal sheets, the 11 by 14, and we could fold them over. And there, boom. So we have the ability to print. So we did our assignments, everyone had articles, and then we would write them. And then we would meet at my parents' office after hours. My parents were really cool like that too, is that, again, like they would trust me. or they would encourage me intellectually and creatively. So I told them I needed access to the office. We're doing an underground newspaper. They're like, all right, sounds. So they were anti-authoritarian. They always kind of, like my dad, well, like when I was in 11th and 12th grade, he was like, look, you keep getting bad grades. I just care about your happiness. Like my dad was like old school. He'd slap me, kick me in the butt. Like he'd push me to do what I'm supposed to do. But after a while, recognizing that that's not what I wanted to do, had to sit down with me, which one of those things that really earn your respect when you're younger, just like lets you get perspective. He's like, look, if high school's not your thing, I know you're going to be successful. I know you have a good mind, and you're my son. So just don't worry about it. And he just basically said, don't worry about high school anymore. Like you're old enough to like, it's too late to like keep trying to do something that obviously you're not into. And I was like 16 or 17. I was like, all right, that took a little pressure off because I always kind of felt bad for letting them down. But so yeah, so I was like, I need the keys to your office. We're doing an underground newspaper. They're like, all right, awesome, sounds cool. Be creative. So we go to the office, and we are cutting out all of everyone comes with their printed things. That's why this is cut and paste, and we're cutting it out. We're doing the layout on the long legal sheet. And then in order to save, because we didn't have much money, even when we had the office, we were still always getting by. So I knew that toner cartridge was expensive. So in order to save money, we would print as many as we can. We printed up to like 1,000. We printed a bunch, at least hundreds. And then when the toner would run out, I forgot how, but there's like a catch for it, and then I would like pour it back into the toner cartridge and we'd reuse it. Which just shows you one of their bullshit things is like we got a lot of more like double the printing that we should have out of those cartridges, so my folks wouldn't really realize just what the scope was. I felt kind of bad that I was using all their toner for my project. Look what's in here. I mean, all that, you could look at the third estate, but like the first one is like, so this is the volume, what volume? This is like volume 4 or something. And we, December. So we did a couple of these. I think we did like 4 or 5. And it says distributing literature, because we have the internet now. So they were trying to tell us, oh, it's illegal, or like, so how do we distribute it? We wouldn't distribute it ourselves. We'd drop them off at places in the morning. One of my friends, I gave her a bunch. She was like 3 years younger, maybe 2 years. She was at the high school. She was in 9th grade. I was in 12th grade. And she got caught with a whole bunch. I gave her some to distribute between the lower classmen. And she got caught with a bunch, and she told me she was in the principal's office, and they're trying to like shake her down, like, all right, who gave these to you? Because they're totally like saying it's illegal, and because we use curse words, it's like, it's really culture. It's like you could like support us for being creative, but it's like we're talking about like crazy stuff you don't want us to talk about, like authoritarian. And then she just started crying. She was like, oh, I got out of it. And she just broke down in tears. Oh no, I just found him. And they let her go. So we never got ratted on. And so what does this say? The cartoon says, who wants a hibachi? Who wants a hibachi? Thanks. I was looking for one of these. The bathrooms are out of toilet paper. We were just like, it was like, fuck you to like the man. So like this, distributing literature, we quoted the California code that you're allowed to distribute literature, underground school newspapers. And then we had an email, contact us, rant, rave, submit an article, and people like email us. People love this. Our teacher, our Latin teacher, that's one of the reasons I took that class. Didn't learn much Latin, but she was like anti-institutional intellectual. I remember she told me she would sit looking at sheet music, listening to the symphony in her head. She was like an amazing mind. She spoke a lot of different languages. She taught Latin out of high school. That's an interesting type of person. But she would read this. She'd be at class just laughing, reading the underground newspaper, and that's when I knew that she was like a cool teacher. Like the cool ones like got a kick out of it. So look at this. RHS, a conveyor of information or bullshit propaganda. Our freshman, well, blah, 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 blah. My history classes have been select in choosing the curriculum, spouting only what they want my sensitive ears to hear. Remember Washington, that man of virtue who was finally taken down by the illness of pneumonia? Did your teachers ever mention how he contacted this illness? No, mine didn't either. I was forced to go outside school to further my education. When he was at his mistress's home, giving her a little of the old in and out, hardcore fucking, the mistress's husband came home and Washington was forced to flee back to his house, half naked in the freezing snow, where he caught pneumonia. Now this is really important because, again, I'm not going to read all these articles, but one of the things that scares me, well, I'll bring up the WTO thing at the end actually, is I'm 36 now. This is November 2018. I was doing real estate from 2012 to 18, so about 4 or 5 years. I did Occupy Wall Street. You could look at my little autobio thing and see how I've tried to document my thoughts and how they've changed from this sheltered conservative Christian kid to whatever it is I am now. But when I turned 30 and I said, all right, let me run with the tribe of money a little bit. And then I felt like I proved to myself I can do it just to do it, because I never really made money before in my life, just so people don't have something on me. Because when I noticed when I was looking at my Occupy Wall Street notes, it's like, I'm kind of insecure about money. So it's like, all right, let's try to make some and see just how hard it is. And I made some, and it's not that hard at all. I mean, it takes hard work, but and I learned some skill sets which I think I'm going to be useful in the future. But I was talking to someone. I was talking to them about how Washington was kind of noble, because you have Washington Square Park right down the street from my apartment. I lived at 13 Carmine number 13, King's Quarters, and I love the city of Manhattan. And I walked all those streets and slept in that park and dropped acid in that park, so many joints in that park. And you see Washington as a statesman on one side and as a warrior on the other. On one side he's dressed with a pen and paper in the full aristocracy attire, and on the other one he's dressed as a warrior with his sword. And it's just like, this is how indoctrination, and this is why you have to take the statues down, because why are they still up? Because it's soft propaganda. Is you have to be humble to the fact that stuff affects you. Even if, I have a friend in the army who would listen to the conservative radio stuff, and he thought it was hilarious. I was like, don't listen to that stuff, dude, because it'll get into your head. Even if you think you're smart, and he's just like, oh, I just want to hear the other side. And it's like, no, the stuff, how our thoughts formed and how our personalities formed, we don't know. And some of it's conscious, but what we do know about consciousness is a lot of it's subconscious. A lot of it isn't chosen. And this is something that my practice with psychedelics also is reinforcing. I'm trying to get into the back door of my personality and back door of my thoughts to do an audit of my personality and my thoughts for the historic record, and also to further my writing. Is what do I believe? How did I come by those beliefs? I know through the books and through the experience I've had, but also, what are emotions? How do emotions relate to rational intelligence? I think emotions are compacted ideas and thoughts, and to unravel these, we don't have enough time, and that's why we have this. And then we also have the pre-evolved brain and the reptilian brain and stuff, and emotions are triggering that side, and then we have the prefrontal cortex and the more rational brain. So we're not really sure how you become who you are. And I say this because I've noticed that I've come to certain thoughts that are very different than who I thought I was. So when I was talking to someone about how Washington's kind of noble, and I just had some story about how he died from pneumonia checking on the post of his property. That was the story that I read. And I read this around 35 or 36, and I was telling someone over a joint, I was like, you know what, those founding fathers were pretty badasses. Washington died because it was sleeting, and he put on a coat because he was like, I'm going to go check my property line. And I was looking at it as just she has barbarian, older times when people were hardier, and Washington's this rugged individualist who's out there on his property on his horse, fuck the sleet, I'm gonna go check my, post of my property because there's Indians out there who can kill you, just like a badass who dies just like the farmer who dies working the land. Then I start reviewing my life, because that started I didn't really choose this path. I've always just intuitively done what I thought I should be doing at any given time. And that's how I feel your intuitive intelligence is able to overcome any possible manipulation. A lot of people think this, but trust your intuition, because there's a reason why you're having it. And if you're wrong, life will correct you, you'll correct yourself. As long as trust your intuition, but also accept correction. So intuitive wisdom plus honesty. If you don't have that honesty, then you'll rationalize, maybe what is just a reaction. What you think it might be intuitive wisdom might just be a reaction to circumstances. But if you accept correction, then you'll understand, because if you're just reacting, life will correct you, someone else will correct you, hopefully, if you live honestly and openly. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I have this radical honesty kick, because I'm so intuitive and so impulsive that I also have to accept correction, because sometimes you're really wrong. So I felt intuitively I should start reviewing my life. The end of 2017 started doing that, started looking. It started with a military file, which we're about to get to. And then I got to this, which luckily I keep all these documents. And in my apartment, I started looking through them all. And then I read that thing about Washington, and I was like, oh shoot, just a month or two ago I said that story about Washington. And I produced this newspaper. My articles aren't even in here. I wrote 1 or 2 articles. My articles were about students, because I always tried to look at the bigger picture where the actual power dynamic is. I was playing chess since I was like in 7th grade, and wrestling, it's all just strategy. So I've always liked, war games and strategy and wrestling, and like in wrestling, like wrestling the bigger kids, your strength doesn't matter. All fights end up on the ground, and now we both weigh the same on the ground. That's the whole thing about fighting, is like once I get you to the ground, I've just taken away a lot of your power. And so, there's this big kid in high school I used to always wrestle with, and he was 6'2", 250, he had like at least 80 pounds on me. So maybe it's like 230, but like, we wrestle pretty even once we're down. But when we're standing up, he could throw me around. So it's like, what was the point of that? That's the thing when you're thinking about all these thoughts and all these emotions, sometimes you get overwhelmed. I'm reviewing my life, and I see this article about Washington, and it contradicts something I said recently. And realizing that I could know something when I was in high school, and then forget it, and then now walk myself into this propaganda mind state of like Washington was a noble figure and not just a womanizer who, like it was a landed aristocracy basically that they tried to set up in the United States. These weren't noble people. I mean, they were maybe somewhat more noble for their times than the average man, or maybe they were opportunists, but they were definitely not like ideological purists. They weren't Bartholomew de las Casas, who was actually like, you could identify his morality with a modern morality. It's like when people say, oh, they were just creations of their time. There were people, the Thomas Paines, who actually had a universal morality that is very similar to like a modern universal morality. Thomas Paine went from the American Revolution to the French Revolution. Like some people, you could stand up their thoughts and ideas in writing throughout time, and it's like Plato, when you look at his morality, it's a pretty good morality. It still stands up. George Washington was a bit of a dick. And for me to think that there was more honor to the man than there was, is just a sign that I'd walked away from this truth, because I was just that soft propaganda. Like we all fall eventually. And that's why the historic record and honest discussion and sincerity is so important, because this is a war of attrition over time for the truth. And it's a war of attrition over time for the narrative of your personal identity of who you are, and our collective identity of who we are, not only as a nation, but as a species. And that's what should scare the fuck out of you, is that without an honest historic record, we don't know who we are. And short-term opportunism by these people who are just power hungry, probably fed by ego and their own, who knows why, people decide to enjoy, who knows why people do what they do, but they are robbing us of our identity. They're robbing, whatever I just said, that's a good way to say it. This isn't we're not trying to summarize political beliefs right here. We're just trying to get out ideas and emotions at this point in time. November 2018, this is how I feel about this one document. But this document was important for this whole process, because that's when I realized, wow, I'm walking away from some truths that I came to. And that's what I've always felt since I was young, is I'm trying to build this personality, I'm trying to build this life. You have one life. And I've always tried to be sincere. I've tried to make sure that it is my creation. And that's what the name is, Shaz Barbaric. That's what this drawing is. These impulsive creations. People might say they're not art, they're not the best art. The point is that it's an expression. And if you want to become a good artist, a good human being, a good lover, a good man, whatever. If you want to, your human potential lies in your sincerity. And as I study spiritual traditions that respect that, I feel more grounded. My artists that I love in my life are the sincere artists. And lies aren't sincere. Propaganda isn't sincere. Political opportunists aren't sincere. And they actually get in the way of our sincerity. If you look in your life and audit it a little bit, and then you find some foundational beliefs that were put there by others in order to control you for their own benefit, that should upset you. That's one of the biggest crimes I think you can commit in this life, is to deprive someone of an honest identity, and that's what malicious propaganda does, and that's why this paper is important, because this paper is kids recognizing that, like the WTO right here. It's happening then. The WTO, those big protests in Seattle, that global pushback against a cabal of financial interests who want to continue to monetize the world at the expense of the human. We have this natural, like, organic response that's trying to stop it. We're trying to put our hands out, and we've been losing this war consistently. They've been pushing and pushing and pushing against human values for, you know, the profit of these few. And we're seeing a response as you start to squeeze the human identity into a smaller and smaller constraint, a smaller and smaller box. You see more violence, because the violence is an indication that the narratives are becoming less and less human. That is my suspicion. And I think as we look into this, it's going to be borne out by the evidence. And this paper is an example that we were a little bit more wild back then. So 18 years ago, 20 years ago, we had a little bit more space to be human. I don't know, who knows, maybe this would be called the terrorist act then. No, we don't need to do this now because we have the internet. But that's the thing, that's why they're going after the internet. Because the internet is, you know, the toothpaste is out and they're trying to put the toothpaste back in, and that's a little scary.